Guys. Tell me about your first car.
Well,
Yeah, see, that's why I wanted to hear these stories, right? We all kind of read that way a little bit. Joe, you tell me about yours first, because Kurt, I'm gonna let you last because you look like you got a great story.
it's not that great, but it's good enough.
All right. My first car was actually a truck, a 1986 GMC Sierra that my brother gave me. And while handing me the keys, he gave it to me for my 18th birthday. While handing me the keys, told me, "I'm sorry." He's like, the AC is shot, the radio is shot. You're gonna need a new transmission within a year or two, but it runs for now. I'm like, all right. I mean, I didn't have a car before, now I've got a car. But that truck, it lasted me my last year of high school, all through college. I sold it like 2 months before I left college, and I ended up getting like $1,500 for it. So I'm like, yeah. And actually, while I was on my my mission trip for my church, so in between high school and college, during those 2 years, my brother drove it, and during that time, my mom had a mechanic put a rebuilt transmission in it. So I came back and it had a rebuilt transmission in it and everything, and so it worked just fine. And but I knew it had already gone from Pennsylvania to Washington. Like, it had already made that trip. I was like, it's not going to make a trip from Idaho to Tennessee, because I got married. I met my wife in Idaho, and after we got married, we moved here to Tennessee. I'm like, it's not going to.
What?
I'm not going to risk that.
Couldn't track that. Can you tell me again?
I went to high school in Pennsylvania.
I know. I don't know. It just struck me how you repeated it there.
And so yeah, it was a fine car. It worked just fine. The radio, my brother was like, the radio doesn't work. It was actually, I think, the speakers that had a fault in it, had a short in the speakers. But I'm like, that's not a big deal, because I can't hear the music anyway since I'm rolling down the windows, so I'm not overheating. So, and it got me from point A to point B. So
That's
yeah,
what I do.
Not a whole lot of kids in my high school had their own cars, so that was nice in and of itself. And it had a covered bed in the back, and so when I was at college, I kept all of my stuff that I didn't necessarily need at college with me in the back of my truck. I just used it as storage, and so it worked out quite well.
I think it was an El Camino, not a truck, but okay, we're cool. Kurt, you said you didn't think yours was that great, but you had a good reaction. All right, I want to hear yours.
What's yours? Because so my very first car I got when I was 19. And so I had started working for a software company, and I had no car. I think my parents were bringing me to and from work at the time. And one of the guys I worked with, in fact, one of the owners of the company, said, "Hey, I've got a car that I'll sell you for $150 because that's what the junkyard will give me for it." And I said, "Does it run?" He said, "Yep." I said, "Okay," and gave him $150. And that thing was a 1980 Chevy Monza with a pushed up trunk. Like, it wouldn't close, it wouldn't seal because it got into a car accident. He had named it Priscilla, so I kept her name to respect her. And had to keep a 6-pack of rear light bulbs in the trunk, because whenever it rained, those lights would short out because the trunk wasn't sealed. And drove that thing for like 2 years, and $150. And because it was a hunk of junk, it wasn't worth insuring, and didn't have any payments on it. And insurance was pretty cheap because, well, as cheap as it could be for a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old. It's going to be expensive anyway. But yeah, it was, and it had one of those old kind of tape decks where you would like aftermarket a tape, because there were no CD players at that point, really, for cars.
So did you have the cassette with the wire that you would hook up to a CD player?
It was 1986, Joe. Portable CD players were not really a thing. I had a CD player for my stereo system at home, but
he had an 8-track, buddy.
Portable. I grew up with an 8-track player. My parents had a console stereo that had a turntable, AM/FM, 8-track, and a cassette player all in the same console.
I was never fancy enough to have an 8-track player. I thought it was cool.
8-track sucked anyway. It was terrible.
Yeah, but I didn't have it, so I thought it was
cool. My dad had a portable 8-track player in his car, or not portable, but a car stereo 8-track player in his car. So I replaced the radio at one point, and it didn't really burn oil, so that was good. But what a hunk of junk that thing was! Oh, it was just bad. And rear-wheel drive, I think, at the time, which in New England, rear-wheel drive when it snows,
spinning wheels, baby,
not good. So yeah, and then I think a couple of years later, I got a brand new car, but that was one where the car payment was $161. My insurance payment was $175 per month. Yeah. So yeah, not a great story, but cheapest car I know of, $150.
Well, mine was free. So the first one I bought was actually a used car on a car lot, but the first one I had that I didn't buy, it was, so to set the tone for you, Joe, is in the 90s. All right. We still didn't have portable CD players, really, kind of. It had tape deck.
Certainly not in Georgia.
I mean, okay. We could have a pour off. I think I'd win. I was poor growing up, but also, no, you're right. There's certain rural areas. We were not in Atlanta. In Atlanta, I'm sure they had all kind of technology. I was in South Georgia, and it had a tape deck. And it had old silver knobs, right, that clicked on and off, and you dial the AM and FM, and it didn't work because the speakers were all cracked. The dash had overheated, from the sun, and it was all cracked. Manual stick shift. So Joe, that's when you have to use your left foot to push in a pedal. Drive like a man.
That's like what mine was too. Mine was stick.
Yeah. Joe, can you drive stick? No, we're men. You're not a man.
Wow.
Papa NASCAR.
What a jerk.
Everybody should know how to drive a stick.
So my dad died when I was 16 before I got my learner's permit. Just saying.
What a horrible father to not teach his son how to drive a stick like a man.
My dad didn't teach me how to drive a stick. I learned on the job.
Oh, yeah, me too. My dad taught you. Okay, 1981 Datsun. Oh, yeah. What you said, Joe? No AC in South Georgia, where we're hitting record highs of 101, 102 in the summertime, right? Copper tone, by the way, like legit, looked like a penny driving down the road, hatchback, pleather seats that were also cracked. That mentioned, no air conditioning. Made a mistake of wearing shorts that didn't go to my knees at some point when I sat there. Yeah. In the winter, you'd freeze, and in the summer, you would die. It was horrible. But I loved it. I loved that car. I was so arrogant about that car. I thought it could race people. It could not. I was so embarrassed, but I loved it because I thought I could do it. But yeah, Kurt. So my dad, here's how I ended up learning how to drive a stick shift with this car, which ended up letting my dad say, okay, that's your car now. Ultimately, we lived on a parsonage. And if people don't know what that means, it's basically your house is on the church grounds. My dad was a preacher. The church owned the house, and it literally, in this case, was on the same property. So my backyard was a legit softball field because they had a couple of acres that the church sat on, and it was just right there. So my dad drove the car out into the middle of the softball field because it's safe. There's nothing around to hit, right? I'm basically driving around the back 40, if you will. And he was trying to teach me to drive a stick shift, the whole let off the clutch, push in the gas. But here's the thing: me and my dad don't communicate very well, and we never have. And I know, right? Yeah, he ate steak at freaking Carrabba's, man. What do you want from him? So, but I got the concepts, but it just wasn't. It was smooth enough. I could do okay to get to work. And legit at the time, work was 5 minutes away, 10 max, no traffic. So my mom, I'm sure, was praying her heart out that her baby would come home every day. My dad was like, good luck, kid. And he went off to a conference. And so during that week that he's gone, and I'm feeling okay at this point, not super great, but random kid, you're really grinding my gears. So John, we'll get to that. That's a good point you made. But it was lunch break. I worked at a grocery store, and I was going to go across the street or right up the street for some food. And one of the girls who worked there was like, "Hey, can I come with you to go eat?" Sure, no problem. And basically, side note, my parents say this is how I learned how to ride a bicycle. Is one day we're in an apartment complex and we're on the second or third floor, whatever. My mom's washing dishes at the window, and she just sees me on some neighbor kid's bike flying down the sidewalk, just going 9 miles an hour, and ran into a tree to stop. Got up, went back up the hill, did it again. And that's how I learned how to ride a bike. Fast forward to 1993. That's how I learned how to drive a clutch. You pop that clutch, slam the gas, and hope you don't kill anybody. Just go, man, go. And so the girl was like, whoa, did nobody ever teach you how to drive a clutch? And I told her the story. So she took maybe 2 or 3 hours right after work to teach me. And let me tell you, when you're trying to impress a girl who's teaching you how to drive, you'll learn to drive real freaking fast. And yeah, that's how I learned to do the stick shift. Only last story I have for it. Like I said, I thought this thing was amazing. Now, 1980 stick shift, okay? Joe, and I'm not even funny, Joe. Well, I say, hey, Joe, it's not a normal engine sound. It's almost like a diesel Jake brake in this stupid Nissan. I mean, when you would just let off and try to cruise even when neutral, I mean, you can hear me coming my way. Can never sneak out of the house, ever. But one night I'm riding around with one of my best friends, Douglas, and I think it was my girlfriend at the time. Some girl was with us, and we're at a light, and it's just not changing. It's a little side alley, side street, whatever. And this is in my heyday of Batman stuff. And for whatever reason, we're just talking. I'm like, screw this light. I throw it in reverse. Nobody's behind me. I throw it in reverse. Try to squeal tires. It doesn't squeal tires. I shoot back, whip into a parking lot, and Douglas and the girl are like, they're just stunned. And I went, I'm Batman. And they just drove off. And yeah. And that was it. And let's talk about this real quick. I got one more thing to talk about that car. But this, Joe, you're dead on. Joe says the best part about my truck was that I had a front seat, so I took girls on dates that could sit right next to me. Smiley's face.
It did. It had a full front seat. So
I did love that. I had a Ford Ranger and a F-150, and they had the bench seat, and I'd make my wife sit next to me. I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I only ever had bucket seats. There was none of that.
Yeah.
Well, and it had a second row too, so it had 6 seat belts. So whenever I needed to go anywhere, people were like, "Joe, can we have a ride?" And I'm like, all right,
yeah, better pile in. But we all get rid of our cars at some point or other, just like we're going to get rid of the show tonight. You all are awesome, but like I told my first car, I need you to be awesome somewhere else. That's the show, everybody. Thank you for coming and making sure you listen again next week.